Yo, what is up, everybody? We are live. You are watching the Zach and Matt show, and we have a very special guest who I am excited to talk to today, and that is Daniel Larson, who is running for U.S. Senate in Montana. And wait for it, this is the interesting part. He's actually running as a Republican. So, as the Yang Gang, we're kind of used to, you know, voting Democrats, and Andrew Yang was a Democrat and supporting Democrats. But as I think a lot of us knew, um the Yang Gang has a lot of ideological diversity, and Yang was able to pull a considerable amount of Republicans and Trump voters and conservatives to his side because they saw the uniqueness in his ideas, and that his platform, not left, not right, but forward, is not just it's not just a slogan, it's a real thing. And that's where you come in, Dan. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became part of the Yang Gang.
So I'm originally from Montana, so I was raised in Missoula, and went to high school here, and then finished grad school at the University of Montana, and then kind of went off and was an industrial engineer for Mars Chocolate. Ran a chocolate plant out of Las Vegas, Nevada. And then I came back home. Part of my dream was to come back home to a state that I loved. And it was a hard return. Economically, Montana has always been a pretty rough place to be. There just aren't that many jobs. So we have a really high rate of entrepreneurs, but we also have a high rate of suicides, huge poverty issues. About 60% of our employment is all retail and service level. So I was managing two hardware stores when originally I was introduced to Andrew Yang. And you can imagine a hardware store, you're sitting around and BS and politics kind of comes up regularly. And people know that I'm usually a little bit to the left of them. So I'm in a deeply conservative county in a pretty red town. And so, I was kind of just always had my head down, when people start talking about the more extreme parts of the Republican platform. So after the July debates, they were just making fun of the whole debates. They were just talking about, just the Democrats being, saying this and that. And one of the guys goes to me, he goes, well, there's only one candidate I do like. He's that Asian guy that wants to give everybody money. And so I went home and I did my research, and I was surprised about what I found in Andrew Yang. And I saw a lot of my experiences in him. So we're about the same age. I've been managing people for a very long time, and spent a lot of my life actually engaged in industrial processes, trying to remove labor or increase efficiency. And the fact that he was willing to sit down and have like these hour-long interviews, and he was always ready to go 2-3 levels deeper in conversations, to me meant that he really thought about these issues before he ran. And I really saw him as a populist candidate, not necessarily a Democrat. And I have huge issues with the establishment and the Democratic Party, and huge issues with the establishment and the Republican Party. And so after Yang, so I started I got my family on board with Yang. We did a Stevensville UBI march where I just painted up my F-150 and got all the vehicles I owned and kind of wrote like UBI on them, trying to generate support. And because to me, it felt important so I wore my math hat every day at the store, just trying to generate a different message. So I saw the math hat as a direct contradiction to the mega hats that were going on in our community. So for me, it's a pretty personal issue. I do have a multiracial family that so my family, I met my wife when we were in Vegas, and then I was talking about how great Montana was, and it was my dream to come back up here. And I bring them to a 97% white community, and everybody's wearing mega hats, and the Republican Party has some pretty negative far right messaging. So I think that it became a very uncomfortable place for them. So for me, some of the wearing the math hat is kind of inspiring people to think a little bit differently, and then take some of the rhetoric out of politics. Because Andrew Yang, I saw him as a candidate that was going to catch fire when he got through rural America. You know, I know Iowa and New Hampshire didn't quite see it, but there's I can sell Yang to a Trump voter the way easier than I can sell him to like a Bernie supporter or, you know.
I noticed the same thing.
Yeah.
In my experiences.
Because I think he's that anti-establishment, you know. And, you know, even though Bernie's anti-establishment, technically he's still, you know, been a senator for a very long time, and he's got some pretty extreme ideas on the left-hand side. So, yeah, so once Yang dropped out, you know, I thought about things a lot. You know, I even did a series of I called them Yang conspiracy videos. Never published them, but I was just kind of devastated. I got home from work, and it was the night of the New Hampshire primary. And, you know, the first piece of news was, you know, Yang suspends. And I was just like, what? No, this can't happen.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've been really disappointed with the Republican establishment for a very long time. And instead of making a bunch of videos about like how, you know, what if Yang ran as an independent, you know, and, you know, whose vice president is he going to be? To me, it just became really clear that the message needed to go on. Universal basic income will be one of the most powerful platforms, hopefully in our lifetimes. You know, we're young. We have to think about this as a multi-year, multi-cycle strategy. If we build this thing up to, you know, 10.5 million people, and it comes from both sides of the aisle, the Yang Gang is going to control America. In a sense, or pro-UBI voters can. And I think that it takes some people willing to pick up the torches and run with it. So we have a lot of congressional candidates, but in the state of Montana, our incumbent Republican senator was going to run unchallenged. And I did everything that I could do. So I donated to the Democrats. There was a field of about 6 or 7. So I chose the top 2, try to get theirs going. I even emailed our governor saying, hey, why are you running for president? You should be trying to take out Danes. But it's not necessarily just from the perspective as a Democrat. It's just I really don't want to see far right Republican ideals continue on. So I think I would like to be a new voice in the Republican Party. But what the final thing that sent me over the edge is when so Steve Daines, maybe people don't know, there's 100 senators out there, but he's like imagine Mitch McConnell in Montana, I guess is what you would have. So he's just kind of a supporter. He, you know, I wrote him a couple times during the impeachment, and his response back was full of executive branch talking points, which I find insulting. So anyway, so the fact that he was going to run unchallenged really bothered me. So I was like, okay. I talked to my wife, and we're like, okay, I think we have the money to do this. You know, at least file for it. But if you have a new U.S. senator who has a different voice in potentially a 50-50 Senate, I could be one of the most powerful senators on the floor versus Montana just having an incumbent that's going to follow the executive branch around. So it's just really now just trying to rise to the seriousness of the microphone I grabbed and figure out how to get this done. So
yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to show some folks who are watching this. If I can just figure out how to share my screen. Screen sharing works best on a good computer. Screen sharing is easiest. We'll see. Share. I just want to show this. It's a picture of you at our hardware store with the
Yeah.
math hat.
Yeah.
I hope hopefully it's showing up and
Yeah, it
greeting
is. Yeah.
customers. And then if I go back here, there was this one here with the
Yep.
math hat in the top right corner. Or yeah, that's the right corner. So just interesting stuff. A true
Yeah.
yang ganger here. And I really it's inspiring to hear from people who decided that Andrew Yang's ideas and what his campaign represented, which was trying to, and we were talking about it before the show, like just that, neither party, neither establishment is bringing up ideas that are actually going to materially change people's lives in a positive way. And
Yep.
to see people like yourself then go on to try to challenge a strong Republican incumbent like Steve Daines and get these ideas even further. It's really inspiring, and I think a lot of people thank you for it.
Yeah. Well, I was comfortable doing it. I think that it's a win no matter what, as long as we're getting the message out there. But I think that people need to realize that, the Republicans are having to defend 23 seats this time. It's 20 in 2 years. That we're going to have to field a presidential candidate no matter what. And it's a coin toss as far as who wins the presidency, but people forget like just how important some of these other positions are. And you can't have UBI just come from one side of the aisle. If we wait for that to happen, we're just going to get pretty upset. But so from all angles and in all races. So.
So this was something when I posted on Twitter that we were going to have you on. People were about like asking, Trump. What about Trump? It just kind of annoys me personally because I want to focus on issues and policies and not who is in office that's out of our control. But when you said you emailed Steve Bullock or was it Haynes about
Bullock
about Trump's impeachment? What was your
Daines
yeah. Bullock is running on the Democratic side. Daines is the Republican incumbent. You're challenging the incumbent Daines in the primary.
Right.
What was your position in that email on impeachment? And I guess where do you fall on Donald Trump in general as someone who's kind of a more moderate Republican?
Okay, so what I would say is I respect Trump voters. I think they were intentionally trying to blow up the system. Everybody forgets that at the beginning of that election cycle, it looked like we were going to have Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush. And I think a lot of people found that pretty hard to stomach. And, so you have a pretty radical candidate. And the second would have been Ted Cruz. So I don't know. So if it's Hillary Clinton or Trump, like I see that as an activist vote. So he won the state of Montana by 20 percentage points. But I think a lot of the Republicans like Steve Daines think that applies to him. And I don't think it does.
I don't either.
Yeah. So we've got corporate politicians on both sides of the aisle, and that's sort of the situation. When it comes to Trump, hopefully I don't start a firestorm here, but I am I respect Trump voters, but I do not like Trump, like the rhetoric that he spits. I think the words that we say matter. I think that he's riling up bases that are way on the long tail of the Republican Party. And I think it's time to abandon the long tail and come back to the center and grow the party. So my impeachment questions to Senator Daines were about, so I was watching it and, I kept listening. So even when it was in Congress, I kept listening for, some Republican to say that, at least one or two or three to say that, okay, well, this merits, an investigation. And then it got to the floor of the Senate and I was waiting for at least a couple to say, all right, if we're going to do a trial, we're going to have, evidence and documents. So there's a a very weak case for acquittal if you don't go through the whole process. So I saw it as a scary thing, to have a complete willing group of Republican senators and congressmen that are willing to go completely along with this president because they're so afraid of the 90% approval rating that he has within the Republican Party. But I think we've seen it in a couple of times. So in the midterm elections, he came out and he gave the Republican Senate challenger to our Democratic senator. He did 4 rallies in the state of Montana. That's unheard of. Presidents just don't visit here. And he still wasn't able to get that guy elected. And so I think there's a false narrative in this country that says that Trumpism applies to Republicans. He was a Democrat at one point as well. I hope we never have another president like him. So I hope it's presidents like Andrew Yang, or if I'm inspiring the next Republican that could come up that actually, is smart, thoughtful, willing to, consider things deeply, just more introspective. We forget that Abraham Lincoln is a Republican, and I meant to say this, and I don't know if I said it quite clear, but when Danes on President's Day actually said that he was celebrating, the party of Lincoln. And to me, that was viscerally upsetting because I think it no longer represents the Republican Party.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where I see the Republican Party as well. Like, I think in general, I like moderate Republican presidents. I think a moderate Democrat, though I kind of agree with you. I never really saw Andrew as a Democrat. I feel like that's where our country kind of lies ideologically, is kind of just that slight right of center. And I think there's too much radicalism in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And then the problem is, besides the radicalism in the inside, you have the establishment that kind of control that center lane. And it means there's really nobody in either party that's coming out with real ideas and real solutions that aren't so far to the left or so far to the right that they can't be accepted by a majority of people. Which kind of brings me to my next question is, what do you think the differences are between someone like yourself or the next generation of Republicans that you'd like to see move forward, or someone like a Donald Trump or a Steve Daines? Specifically, I guess more on policy versus rhetoric.
Yeah, I think it would be, well, number one, I think it would be the SEC filings. You should be able to notice a difference as far as whether it's grassroots funded or corporate funded. The Republican Party has this huge donor base that's all, there's thousands of contributions from everybody in every industry, and sometimes they're in direct conflict from the types of decisions they'd have to make. So our legislators have to make difficult decisions. And I think that they need to remain honest when they get to those decisions so that they can listen to the wisdom on both sides and make a sort of an eloquent judgment in the moment. I think they also need to be able to problem solve with the other side of the aisle. So I imagine it like this: like if you had the far left progressive wing of the Democratic Party gain momentum, and there's some populist candidates there that, are kind of inspiring just from what they're doing, but their voices need to be balanced with, all right, let's be fiscally conservative, and let's make sure that we temper our approach and don't grow our government like beyond any reasonable means. So I think that I see it like this. It's like when you're coming together as a group. So imagine like Congress is the bridge of the Starfleet Enterprise or something like that, and they're trying to fly to Mars. I don't think they would get there because they're just not working together, and I think that the what happens in small spaces tends to be true in large. And in the Montana legislature, there's a group that's sprung up, the Solutions Caucus, and they're a band of moderate Republicans that have been able to balance the voice of the extreme parts of the party. And I think that Montana's better off having those guys, and I'd like to take that style of cooperation to the federal government, because I think that there's, if you're coming left, far right, there's space in the middle to do some real work. So I think Republicans can say, all right, let's look at climate science, recognize that there's something that we need to do, but then adopt approaches that are sustainable and robust over time. Universal basic income, I think, just the term universal means Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green Party. I think it's a good place to start, and if you did it first, then you'd be able to get some real work done on the rest of the problems that face us. And as we think what happens to like our children, and then even generations after that, I think it's time right now to start a wave going that puts us in a different generation of thought. Does that make sense? Like a new understanding of what it's going to take to get there, because we will have to solve some of these problems, and right now we're just not very good at solving problems. And you can see you can see it in this COVID-19, the 900 pages that it took versus something as simple as UBI. It's just kind of disheartening that we didn't plan for this ahead of time.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it's times like this when you really see where your government's been lacking, and we've been lacking for a long time. I kind of want to do like a few like hot fire round questions, where I just ask
sure.
Interesting things that traditionally maybe Republicans have a certain view on, but now they're kind of centered in the Democratic Party, and maybe these are ideas that the Republican Party should put more emphasis and thought into, and really try to make these ideas bipartisan. So first one, what's your opinion on either the legalization or decriminalization of marijuana? Where would you fall there?
Oh, yeah. So I think there's a bit of hypocrisy in this question, just because they've adopted the Republican Party has adopted the stance that here we have all this problem from criminal elements in Mexico and Latin America, when our drug policy has actually created a very lucrative system of drug trade. So first of all, once a state legalized marijuana, it doesn't belong on the federal schedule of drugs at all. So the fact that it's still on there, I think Republicans have done a disservice to state, the rights of states to control their own policy. And then if we really are concerned about drug use over time, we have to change the conversation, because simply making something illegal has never made it, never reduced the effects. In fact, it just creates a whole criminal element. So I don't know whether you go to, I don't know if I support like full legalized, let's have it, in every grocery store and tax it. I think that we have examples of like the tobacco industry and stuff like that, where maybe it's not something we want to promote, but certainly let people grow, let people smoke, let people, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then I think the Portuguese have taught us a few things. So they went from a very conservative, far right stance, and they had a problem so big that they had to just rapidly solve it. So that included decriminalization of things like opioids and clean injection sites. So I'm kind of inspired by, there's a couple of economists that just won a Nobel Prize, and they do work in India, and all they do is they just test some of these theories, just test, what's coming up from like how to solve different problems, and they're using, data, which is crazy, and to test these recommended solutions. And I think that if you have a solution that works, it doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican, you should be able to adopt it. So drug trade has been it been a disaster that I'd be ready to let go of U.S. drug policy the way it exists.
Mm-hmm. So you're definitely in favor of, say, decriminalization.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But then on legalization, maybe it would depend how it's done, or maybe leave it up to the states.
Yeah, I think that's where I would lie, is you've got to leave it up to the states. But at a federal level, the U.S., we forget, U.S. has huge control over the financial system globally. So once somebody commits a crime in U.S. currency, we have the ability to go after things like trafficking and criminal behavior. So it's not like you just decriminalize the drug and it makes the behavior less criminal, because it's still illegal to kill people. It's still illegal to racketeer. So if people are concerned about that, I think there's still a heavy hand that the United States could leverage. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about private prisons? Is that something that you think our government shouldn't really leave up to the private sector? Or
yeah, criminal justice reform is a major issue, whether you're Democrat or Republican. So what I would like to see is, so if we have a prison population that's greater than, let's say we choose like best practices countries, that are relatively safe. And if we're sitting here at 5% and say reasonably we've done the studies and crimes are committed at 2-3% of the population, I think that means that we have a serious issue, and private prisons are probably driving a portion of that issue. So I would be looking to get away from private prisons as soon as possible.
Awesome, glad to hear it. Another hot topic is guns. You're obviously a Republican. Montana loves guns.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it. But what do you think the solution is on just trying to overall stem all gun violence that kind of happens in our country, whether it's these record high suicides and people are just unfortunately and very tragically blowing their heads off, to these mass shootings that we're kind of seeing at an increasing pace. Is that something that we should do on the gun safety side, or is it more of a mental health issue, or is it more of both, I guess?
I see it as, both. I see it as a cultural issue, like for example, growing up in a kind of a heavy gun state, like I remember, when I'm in 3rd and 4th grade, that's when we talk about, oh, wouldn't it be nice to shoot a machine gun or something like that. But very quickly, the adults that I remember were teaching us respect for guns, responsible gun ownership. So I think that there are countries like Switzerland and stuff that have done pretty good. As somebody running in the state of Montana, wouldn't.
Doesn't everyone in Switzerland own a gun or something?
Yeah, they have a high rate of gun ownership. They have a low rate of mass deaths or gun deaths overall. But like if you look at a state like Montana, we're one of the highest per capita gun deaths, but it's mostly suicide. So I think that, it doesn't really take changing the Constitution to change gun deaths, I don't think. And I couldn't support a change in overall gun legislation. I wouldn't advocate for some of the things that are trying to be done with the open carry. I think that, whether you're a public institution or a private company, you have the right to say that open and carry, once you post it, is not allowed. So I would change that gun conversation. But I think the main thing that I want to call out here is the political force of the NRA. So I think that you can say that I'm pro Second Amendment. But I do think that the Second Amendment was more about the protection from the government, the tyranny of the government. It was the best provision that they had at the time. So I would like to offer to those pro Second Amendment folks the fact that I'd be working on repealing the Patriot Act, or looking at law enforcement from a federal and local level, in making sure that we roll back some of these things like no-knock warrants and privacy protections. Also, corporate proliferation of your data, I think, is an issue. So I would support giving data rights as well.
Well, I mean, data is a huge issue, and it's something that nobody, I feel like, in Washington talks about.
Well, that's because they're benefiting from it currently. So the Republican Party, I don't know if you caught some of what they were doing in the last election cycle, at least presidential, but they're taking, this immense amount of data that like Facebook has on people, and the Trump community is very insular. And what they're doing is they're doing these highly targeted sort of manipulative of things to a lot of people, and I don't remember giving Facebook the right to have so many data points on me. I don't know if you remember when you signed that agreement.
Yeah. So. Well, I've heard I forget who it was I was listening to recently, and they were like talking about how the companies can be like, oh, well, you signed our agreement. And it's like, no, I didn't. Nobody is going to scroll through your 700 pages of garbage that literally it says at the very top, by the way, we can change this policy at any time and you have to accept it. I mean, that was one of the big things that I wish became more of an issue in 2020. Like universal basic income gained so much traction, but man, nobody is talking about data and data privacy. And you have Facebook in for a hearing in Congress, and they're like, how does Facebook make money? It's like, sir, we have ads. It's a whole disaster.
I think I remember a conversation where people were putting like you've given over the rights to your immortal soul and stuff like that in their terms of service. So definitely people aren't reading them.
Absolutely. What do you think? What do you think is a good way to make the case for a younger candidate like yourself to bring these new ideas into Washington? Like, how would you convince, if you were talking to someone who loved Steve Daines right now, what would kind of be your pitch on why someone like you should be in office?
Sure. So when you look at somebody like Steve Daines, everything that he's done hasn't been bad. Similar with President Trump, but it's how they make decisions. And so right now we're going through, so we're thinking about it in the perspective of COVID-19, but our energy sector just took a major hit, and there's going to be bankruptcies in the energy sector. And it's a lot of what the Republican Party has been pushing for a very long time. And they push it because these campaigns and these candidates are actually funded by the energy sector. So we had 12 years of growth that was unprecedented. And they were just selling, hey, the economy's great. The economy's great. It can never go down. Any reasonable person could have pointed to like at least 3 things that would cause it to fail. And so the fact that they're not building resiliency in those prosperous times is a pretty big indicator that they're too close to the corporate interests to actually make reasonable policy decisions.
Mm-hmm. What how do you think you convince more Republicans to adopt policies like universal basic income?
Well, the strategy that I have that kind of works, and I borrowed a little bit of it from Yang, was the fact that if you think of the government as good as only 2 things, writing checks and collecting taxes, then you can make a pretty powerful case for eliminating government bureaucracy or the government overreach. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm testing out these new little screens.
Yeah, I don't know how this works.
I just figured out how to make you full screen. So
excellent. I like you making me full screen then.
Yeah, because I saw it on the bottom left. I see you got the full Dan Larson for Senate. And then I can't see what the one letter is that's right behind
R.
you.
It's R.
SROP.
Oh, in my
Or
sign?
stop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so STOP is my campaign slogan. It stands for See the Other Perspective. And so it's yeah, so it's when we have conversations one-on-one, and you might have noticed this if you have like, somebody that's in a different political ideology than you, that usually when you sit down and talk, there's about 85% of things that you agree on. And so if we use that part of the Venn diagram to discuss where we go as a nation, that's why I was thinking STOP might make sense for people, because if they start listening to each other and find out where our commonalities are, that we'd actually make progress in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone says tell conservatives. Okay, I don't know what that comment was about. This is gonna be another, I guess, kind of touchy issue, but one that people care about on both sides of the aisle.
Sure.
What is your opinion on abortion? And I guess maybe I kind of have a follow up depending on your answer, but go.
Sure.
I'll let you answer on that.
So this is an issue that's that deeply concerns a lot of people of faith, and what I would like to offer them is an approach that's going to reduce the number of abortions overall. But that when the Roe v. Wade was decided in
About the 70s.
In the 70s, it was reaffirming a privacy right, which is similar to like Second Amendment people. We want kind of the individual protections afforded to us by the Constitution. So what I would offer is that federal programs to actually reduce the number of abortions, and then but not through legislating access. Does that make sense? So it's more conversations about IUDs and birth control, and less conversations about perverting the judiciary. Because what we allow when we try to influence federal court judges to overturn Roe v. Wade is we really allow an open door for some very terribly politicized viewpoints by federal judges. So I think we need to realize that we live in a system where we want moderate and reasonable jurisprudence and move forward. So I respect people. There are some things on the table like that are kind of hard to get people to move on. But I think that everybody should be able to agree that if we had a better conversation around, when two people sleep together, they should actually care about each other. That's kind of a weird concept. And then be prepared for whatever happens. And then there is technology to kind of help reduce the number. And if you look at like third world numbers where they've actually increased or decreased unwanted pregnancies overall, it really is just talking about condoms. It's the education of women overall. It's the, things like universal basic income would totally change the conversation. So yeah, I think once we started with universal basic income, we'd have a win for everything that people care about.
I think someone said personally, like I fall more in the pro-life category, and someone said how can you be voting for a Democrat if you're pro-life? And someone else pointed out that universal basic income is probably the most pro-life policy.
Yeah,
in terms of actually, if you care about reducing the number of abortions. And
sure,
I kind of have this. I'd like to hear your perspective on this. One thing that kind of bothers me about Republicans is excuse me, they're pro-life. However, it seems to me that at the same time they're like, oh, we need to restrict access to contraceptive care. And my thoughts are like, if I truly really care about the pro-life perspective and I'm a Republican, or it doesn't matter what party, if I'm just part of the pro-life perspective, why am I not doing everything in my power to try to make sure everybody can have affordable or even free contraceptive care if you truly believe in the pro-life position? What do you think about that? And is that something that maybe Republicans should think
I
more
think,
about?
yeah, I think everybody should think more about it. So pro-life is pro-life, and that means that all life, no matter where it exists. And we forget that once people are born, we kind of forget about them. And so I would like to start focusing on some of the other issues that we can make more progress on as far as respect for human life. I think leaving it as an individual decision where people are deciding on whether to terminate a pregnancy or not, I think is a good idea, because there is still medical necessities for abortion. There's always going to be a gray area. And, I have some experience on my own as far as like health issues during pregnancy. I mean, not my pregnancy, but my wife's, where, those are hard decisions. And when you have far right Republicans saying, oh no, now it's legal to kill babies forever, they're not really putting it in the right perspective of
100%.
those being mother life issues and really hard, heart-wrenching issues that people are having to face every day. And the last person they should be talking to is a judge, in those respects. But yeah, let's talk about condoms. Let's talk about contraception and contraceptives, IUDs, and respecting people and not treating things like they're inconsequential. So people understand these things. So
Yeah, no, 100% in terms of, I mean, one of the things that I liked on your website was that you talked a lot about just trying to unite people and bring people together. And here I am over here thinking, like, part of the reason that our discourse is so messed up in the first place is because I feel like some of these further to the right Republicans are going, oh, everyone on the left is just aborting babies left and right and they enjoy it. And I'm like, no, that's not really. And
yeah.
then it's the opposite thing on the other end of the spectrum. It's, oh, the right wants to control your bodies. And I just, my personal feeling is you can't assume other people's motives. You have to try to
Right.
understand why they feel the way they feel, and that's the only way you're going to be able to bring people together when you disagree on such passionate issues. So someone else, they just brought up a topic. What is your opinion on universal health care? I'm assuming you're not on the Medicare for all train with Bernie. Do you
Right.
think there should be a private option, or do you kind of agree with like the Yang plan of just reducing costs and then boosting accessibility? Where do you fall there?
Yeah, I would say it's similar to Yang, and I've talked to other people that are running that have more information in healthcare as well. And so this is there's a lot of efficiencies within U.S. healthcare, and I think it's inappropriate at this point for the government to foot the whole bill. I think that there's enough framework probably within the ACA to come back to it and force certain people out of the conversation and start reducing healthcare costs overall. I think there's a lot of people willing to accept individual accountability for their own healthcare up to a certain point. There might be a universal, like, major medical option that would be, something that you could purchase. I see this as a multi-year solve that's going to require a lot of working together, and I think it's an inappropriate point just to start throwing trillions of dollars at a problem and end up with a inefficient system that's government supported.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking for a comment here. Somebody had a question about immigration. While I look for it, what is kind of your stance on immigration, I guess, with the border? Do you agree with kind of Trump's overarching approach, or this is just another one of those complicated issues, but I guess just explain, I guess, a brief intro of where you fall.
Yeah, so a border wall doesn't do anybody any good. So there's no evidence to support the fact that it works. But I do think our immigration courts are broken, and that's where I would like to spend a lot of our time. So even though we're processing people that are not U.S. citizens, we still have to be humane in the process. We can't have just open borders, anybody comes, but I think there are some smarter solutions as far as working visas, things like that. But we actually have a responsibility, I think, to, like Mexico and Latin America, to help them or encourage them to develop some of their What I'd say is our influence has actually been fairly negative in those areas, and I think that if the U.S. kind of inspires other nations with things like universal basic income, if we had a better drug conversation that was taking some of the cartel influence out of it, and then as in the United States, if we start respecting the fact that that our immigration conversation has been pretty racist for a very long time. You know, one of the highest numbers of visa overstays are actually from Canada, and we don't even talk about that like it's a problem. So yeah, I agree with Andrew Yang where the United States should be a magnet for talent around the globe, and then I think that we should have a legal process that's fair, and people need to start talking about the fact that we're deporting U.S. citizens, and it's anytime we're violating human rights, that's a problem. And a border actually only increases the number of legal immigrants in the United States. So a wall would only kind of keep people from going back and forth. And I think that there's some smarter solutions out there.
I guess that leads perfectly into the next question. Mike CK, otherwise her name's Michi, asks, on immigration, how do you help other countries minimize people coming here illegally to seek asylum cases? And I guess that would fall back on what you said in terms of the number of judges, because, you know, the more and more people seeking asylum, more and more judges that are just packed with cases and the system gets overrun. How do you think we change that?
How do we change that? So
it's a tough question because nobody in Washington's been able to figure it out.
No, we have to do. We've got courts all over this nation, and we need to improve our judicial system, and that includes immigration courts. And you can't go rounding up hundreds of thousands of individuals if you can't process them. And then with asylum seekers, we're forgetting that these people are actually fleeing some pretty terrible conditions, and then when we hold them in Mexico, which is not their native country, that we're opening them up to a whole bunch of other pretty tragic things. So if we started treating people humanely, like what would that look like? I'm not saying let's just let everybody in, but if you look at economists that have studied like crime rates within immigrant populations or farm workers or agricultural workers, like most of the crime rates are lower than the native population. So we've been having the wrong conversation. So it's what are the true economic impacts of illegal immigration, and you know, how do we construct a solution that allows us to have a reasonable immigration policy but still treat people humanely. So it's another long solve, but it's a better conversation to start off with, just to try to get the system more effective.
You referenced earlier about how most of the gun deaths in Montana are because of suicides, and it's just tragic. We've seen it rising more and more all over the country, and unfortunately, things like coronavirus, that's just going to cause more financial insecurity. It's just going to make that number go up. But how do you think we can solve this mental health crisis in our country, where people are just doing things that, you know, if they could wait 5 minutes later, they would regret it, and it's a tragedy for families and communities, and something we need to change.
Yeah, I think you could actually do some federal grants for some smarter conversations. Maybe there is different licensings that's required for like handguns and stuff like that. You can include a conversation or like a mandatory sort of suicide awareness. I think if people were more aware of like, hey, if I get regular feelings like this, I should probably, give my guns to a friend for a while. Or even within family structures, because domestic violence and gun deaths is a real issue. So certain things like UBI, I think would help the overall hopelessness that kind of generates truly, if somebody's suicidal and serious about it, they're going to have that conversation. But UBI could level the playing field, but then a better conversations even between people. So like if your partner, if your friend, your dad, mother, child, if you see these symptoms, it's time to lock the guns up. Is a good question.
Do you think maybe that you'd be in favor of something like a red flag law, where if someone has a mental health issue, or not related to suicides, but if someone says they're going to go out and do something insane, like threatening to shoot up a school, where they could actually petition a court and say, hey, this person is doing this. It'd be like a family member or friend. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but you could petition a court to have their Second Amendment rights temporarily, I guess, revoked.
Sure. So I think there's already, like within partner family member assault, so there's already a restriction for guns after that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, probationary status restricts their rights to have guns as well. I think that the Constitution has always been reinforced when it comes to the right to own guns as a militia. And then individual rights as far as handguns have been somewhat contentious, but I think it's been upheld. So the red flag laws, what I would like to do is approach the issue without legislating the gun itself. But that it is supporting awareness, I think, and it's supporting a healthier gun culture. And from a political spectrum, I think we're kidding ourselves when we say that the messages that we've been speaking don't matter. We see that we talk about terrorism all the time, but we do have a problem with domestic terrorism. And I think a lot of it starts in chat rooms. It starts by conversations that are given out from politicians, from conspiracy theorists. So I think we can catch people at a lot of different points throughout their interactions with society. And I think that we should be, there's some good work with, that was done by the State Department, I believe, with Islamic extremism. So what they do is they identify these sort of gateway conversations that are being had, and then they just reach out to them at those moments, and they give them a different path to go down. And I think that those types of solves would be far more effective than legislating the ownership of a gun. But honestly, I would say to like any woman that is living in an abusive relationship should not allow themselves to be their one. But if there is a gun in the household, they need to remove themselves from the situation as soon as possible.
Yeah. I know that there's definitely there's always like a fear on people who are passionate about the Second Amendment. Like the moment you let Congress get a hold of it, it's just a concern.
Well, I think if we could start dialing the conversation differently, saying that, hey, relax, we're not going to touch your guns for a second, but here we're going to work over here. I think that gets us through the next at least 6 years. We can have a different conversation later, but I think that we have enough good places to start right now to end that conversation.
Mm-hmm. What was my next topic about? I had it in my head and then I forgot. I hate when that happens. If anyone in the chat has any questions while they're watching this, feel free to add in. I think I guess I could ask this: what is an issue that maybe is specific to Montana that doesn't get talked about a lot on the national level, that you would have more insight on?
Yeah, so public land access is a big deal in Montana. So I don't know like what to say about it specifically, but the federal government and the state actually own, I think it's like 72% of all land in Montana. And so that's really important for people in Montana, is to maintain access. This is hunting, fishing, access to public lands, and then some of the conversations around federal use of land, so opening them up to mining operators or mineral mineral extraction and oil exploration have been some contentious talking points, just because there's clean air, clean water effects that I think people wouldn't expect it, but both Republicans and Democrats like a healthy environment, and they like to be outdoors, and they like beautiful things. So that's one of those things that's kind of contrary to what a lot of people would be intuitively thinking, is that Republicans would just be like, let's go after everything at all costs. But Montana Republicans are pretty conservative with that.
Mm-hmm. I remember what I was going to ask you about. I was going to ask you about what you see the U.S.'s role in overseas, with all these different conflicts. Do you think we should would you more fall in the, just stay out of all the wars, go into all the wars, or is there a balance that should be struck?
Yeah, people can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we need to start moving our Department of Defense spending towards some of the mobilization for some of our efforts towards being more resilient against climate change and things like that. But I would like to no longer have wars over resources. I think that Andrew Yang actually laid out a pretty good 3-point model for his foreign interventions that include human rights, whether there's other countries that are willing to go in and support us. But yeah, there's still global posturing that's kind of concerning from like the Chinese, for example. And then there's still democracies that need to be encouraged and developed. But I think the UN is similar to the US, where it needs some revitalization of its members. But I would like the U.S. to actually support some international efforts more than individual efforts when it comes, and use that as our model for defense rather than the size of our individual navy. It should be the strength of the UN and NATO.
Mm-hmm. You're referring to more of Andrew talked about coalition building and working.
Yeah,
with, like
I think we're
NATO.
In our modern global
NATO.
Yeah, so in our modern global perspective, I think that we need to start telling countries, hey, we respect sovereignty, and stop fighting with the other like major forces over resources.
Mm-hmm. This is another interesting one, I guess, to ask someone on the Republican side of an aisle, because as we were both kind of referencing earlier, with some of the more farther to the right views on the Republican side of the aisle, where do you fall on climate change? Is it a hoax? That's a joke. I know you don't think it's a hoax, and I personally, I actually don't think most people do. I think it comes down to, people believe in it, but it's how much should we do about it. But what are your thoughts there? And
so I think it's been heavily politicized, and I remember sitting in a college lecture like 20 years ago and walking out being like, oh my God, this is something we're going to have to address in my lifetime. And so here we are. We have data that supports evidence that CO2 levels are rising, and then we have known climate change effects that we should be dealing with. As far as the solutions, I think we should be choosing solutions that are actually benefiting the economy and benefiting humanity first, and then but starting to move the needle. So so the recent collapse of the gas prices, I think, is a good case to say, with the potential bankruptcies in the industry, that Montana shouldn't be supporting the Keystone XL pipeline going through right now, because tar sands oil, if we start burning that first, we could potentially be changing the global climate even faster. So,
do you think we should eventually move to like an all green economy?
I think there's great economic opportunities when you talk about things like rural broadband, when you think about green economies, but we do have to be realistic. It's an equation that includes, balancing the needs of people with the production of energy. So I see it like this: if you have something like universal basic income first, and then you can have a lot of better solves. But for all of us, we have an individual accountability to be more responsible and consider how we approach our lives from a resource perspective. So I think some of the better things to do first would probably be public transportation infrastructure, and then work wind and solar. And then I think that Andrew Yang brought it up, and then I looked into it, but I think thorium and nuclear might have to be on the table for the long term.
With when you just said thorium there, like everyone who was watching, their eyes probably just lit up. The Yang Gang loves thorium. They cannot get enough of thorium.
Well, we forget when we gave ourselves a moonshot, in the 60s, that it generated, all of the scientific platforms that give us like our modern cell phones or computers or things like that. So I think that if we have some stretch goals as far as, the technologies that we want to foster or develop, I think it'll bring us all along in humanity, actually.
This is kind of a random question we have here. Matak, Gaming and Funny Things, would like to know your stance on China.
Yeah, I think
as a our competition in terms of trade and
stuff
like that.
So I would like to reduce our overall dependence on China. I think that there is a number of things that were appropriate, I think, for like Trump to start a trade conversation with China on. I don't. His approach is very scary. It gives me a lot of heart palpitations. But we can just see like our dependency on China just within the supply chains that were affected by the coronavirus. That the U.S. resiliency is something we always need to keep our eyes on. And so we think in modern life that we have like this great proliferation of the kind of individual wealth just by our ability to buy things. But these are cheap things, kind of like cheap Walmart things. And I think that the U.S. would be served pretty well with a focus on increasing the amount of consumer durables or really well-made products coming out of the United States of America. Because as we attack things like waste and climate change, I think that moving towards durables is a good idea. And I think moving away from dependency on China is a good idea. Some cases for global trade in certain markets, but I think that they definitely need a stiffer approach when it comes to intellectual property and trade and human rights. I mean, Jesus. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have another kind of hot topic question related to China. What do you think of the Trump administration's overall rhetoric in terms of and the media has been kind of all over it for the Wuhan virus, or calling it the Chinese virus, or calling it whatever. My personal opinion is I think it's all politicized and it's like distracting. But what is your opinion?
Yeah, my opinion is there's nothing that improves the conversation when the president of the United States starts talking like that. Like when you have a president, he should be very considerate of his word choice and very reflective of how this affects people. And when he says certain things, it has effects. So
yeah,
like it's a human problem. We've got a human virus, and in the future, if we could just have more professional conversations come out of our politicians, I'd be happier. But I don't want to sit in this time and start, bashing, everybody involved. I think this is a time where nationally we can see that things, people are trying to come together as well. So.
Yeah, totally. There's no point to get like caught up in the back and forth of the crazy just the politics that
and people are still caught up in the conspiracy theories and all that stuff, and it's just like, okay, we have a virus that's affecting all of us, so let's deal with it there.
Yeah, just come together and put politics aside. That's one of the things that's been bothering me most is like I feel like as citizens we should be able to have faith in our institutions, and so much of that faith has been lost, where people don't even. I have a pamphlet sitting over there. It's like Trump's coronavirus guidelines, and but people will get that and they'll be like, I don't know whether to trust this. And then on the opposite side of the aisle, conservatives might go on CNN and MSNBC and be like, ah. It's unfortunate that that's the way the state of our country is.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad times that we live in, but it's part of this open door that I think the rest of the Yang Gang needs to know this, right? So there's so many negatives within the Republican Party, and there's so much positives with the universality of UBI that we need to demand that this message happens on both sides of the aisle. And really, this is our open door. We need to grow this to 10.5 million people and be able to swing every election and become the most important and influential voting bloc that brings people towards solutions in this country. So if people are listening, it's time to step up. You can follow, you can there's a digital footprint that we're all creating, and people notice it, but we need to have conversations individually with other people and grow this movement. And then we need to show it through votes, and we need to show it through donations as well. And I hate to be pandering, but yeah, it'd be great. Or volunteer hours, or somebody to help you make those supercuts like you guys used to make,
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
There were multiple people in here who lived in Montana, so I don't know if they'd be local to you, but how could people sign up and volunteer to help with the campaign?
Yeah, so I need about 76,000 votes to get this done. 76,000 Republican votes. I'm in an open primary, so I think I can get up to 110,000. But if people want to get involved, the Yang Gang has some real strength, and just reach out to the campaign. We're trying to put it together as far as, if you have 10 minutes to volunteer, here's 10 minutes worth of task that we can give you. So we have multiple human lifetimes just sitting on this call. We've got to use every single minute wisely. So by June 2nd, just imagine if 200,000 Yang Gangers were helping me call people in the state of Montana and influencing them to consider me for Steve Daines. I think that you would have a pro UBI Republican U.S. senator.
Yeah, it would be incredible.
Yeah,
it would be amazing. And
yeah,
I know Montana is probably going to be one of the most contested Senate seats this cycle. Millions of dollars are going to be thrown in it by both parties, and
right.
We were able to put someone in there who actually has an independent voice and isn't stuck in the Washington, whatever awful word you want to come up with for it. That would truly be a feat and a sign of strength for the Yang Gang.
Yeah, so imagine this. So imagine the headline: June 2nd, Dan Larson upsets Senator or incumbent Senator Steve Daines for the Republican nomination in Montana. It would send a shockwave all the way to Washington, D.C. So this is some of the wave that Yang was talking about. And they'd be looking at, how did he get this done? And it would be like, well, because he adopted a UBI platform. All of a sudden, Republicans would be like, hey, I'm for UBI. Anybody else?
Oh, so this is the winning strategy.
Yes.
Run on UBI.
Yeah. And you've seen it. There's a lot of Democratic candidates that have been willing to swing that way, but I think there's a very conservative case as well. So
yeah, there's some, when this whole coronavirus thing happened, when Mitt Romney came out for $1,000 a month, and then Trump came out for it, and Biden and Sanders, the two front runners in the Democratic Party, still hadn't come out for any form of UBI. I'm just like, my gosh, what are the Democrats doing?
Yeah, you're blowing it, man.
My prediction is as soon as the American people get their hands on cash in their pocket, they're gonna be like, "Oh my God,
Yeah, yeah.
why was I against this?" You know?
What I like to imagine is that I think Yang had talked about it once time, but if we're all just sitting in a room together, you know, like you're at a bar and everybody gets the text, you know, that UBI has now funded my account. It's like, whoa,
Hey,
everybody's got
rounds
a
are
different
on
opinion.
me.
Yeah, people would be feeling really different about a lot of things. But, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. We've gone through, I think, pretty much every issue here, unless there's like
Yeah.
anything I'm missing.
Oh man, there's probably a million things.
Well, yeah,
But
there's.
yeah.
I've tried to go through all the big ones. If anyone has any other topic that you'd like to see us talk about, let us know. But the point I wanted to bring up is the one thing that does tie all these topics together: immigration, healthcare, mental health, number of suicides, drug crime, drug overdoses. The one thing that could affect all of these different issues at once is universal basic income.
Yep.
And that's what people in whichever party decides to make that part of their platform first.
Yeah.
It's going to be crazy. Okay, we got a question from
Sure.
Ari. Where did you fall on the federal minimum wage? I know AOC and Bernie and a lot of others, they're in the 15 min wage. Where do you think we should?
I think that a minimum wage is kind of like a tax on employers, and I would be saying to them, so theoretically, I'm going to be sitting in a 50-50 Senate, you know? So imagine Bernie as president and AOC and everybody are trying to say $15 minimum wage. I'd be saying, how about we do UBI? You know, universal basic income, I think, is far more efficient than a $15 minimum wage. It's just like the stimulus package where we're just ignoring the fact that people just need to hear there's some level of security going forward.
Mm-hmm. See if anything else comes in while we wait. How can people donate to your website? I'm on your website right now. There's a donate Montana.com.
Yeah, it's good that you asked. There's a donate in the header, and so the problem is I don't know if my voters are comfortable going on the Act Red program, and then since I'm a Republican, I don't know if the Act Blue is appropriate. So I chose a middle level payment processor. So hopefully people can get used to it. So.
Yeah, I think this might be kind of a
bigger
thing.
Button.
When I went to click on donate, it pulled up like my Norton antivirus, and it was like, "Are you sure you want to visit this site?"
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that might be something to check out on your side.
Everybody, it is legit. Yeah.
But I just put the link in chat.
Okay.
Someone asks, "How likely are you to win?" Well, you can answer that in a sec, but I kind of want to put my thoughts into it.
Sure.
When all of us in the Yang Gang, when we threw our support and our energy and our money and our time and our passion into some random guy that nobody in America had ever heard of,
right?
And now you're seeing parts of his platform being implemented into the national stage. Like checks were literally, whether you hate the means testing or you love it, I hate it.
Yeah.
There was cash signed into law that went to Americans today. And that all happened because we rose up and decided to not go for Mr. Popular, who had the most points with the media and the establishment. Yeah. We went for the guy that we agreed with on ideas. And one of these days, one of these candidates that we throw our weight behind is going to shock the world, and it's going to do so much more for our movement. But I'll let you answer more on that.
Yeah, I absolutely can win, but I can't do it on my own. So they're right now it's me and a team of 3. And if you were to look at it externally, it's like, oh, there's no way this guy's going to win. But people are forgetting that I've got all the 20 points of activist vote just on the Republican side that are looking for an anti-establishment candidate. I've also got a open primary in which I can entice independents and Democrats over to a better line of thinking. And people forget that 15% of the Republican Party is already ready to jump ship. So,
Yep.
yep.
Those are some good points. I didn't even think about that. You'll pretty much.
And then you add UBI.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then you add the strength of the Yang Gang and the fact that I'm going to get 250,000 people to call people in Montana. So.
Heck yeah, hopefully. What was it I was gonna say? Dang it! I hate when I forget what I was thinking. Maybe we'll come back later. Someone asked thoughts on housing costs and zoning regulations. I guess do you think there should be like things like rent control, or I mean, from my perspective, the way I kind of see this is like why is there like an issue with affordable housing in terms of zoning regulations? It's like, well, the same people I feel like who kind of are like, oh, we need to build more housing. As soon as they build the cheap housing next to their luxury apartments, they're like, oh, no, not here. Which I think is just dumb and counterproductive.
So I think housing in the United States of America has had a lot of issues. And so I think the worst thing we could do is start saying, okay, well, this is the program, the government's going to roll it out, and it starts to look like really just the government level housing for everybody. So there's some really easy solves. I used to be a mortgage broker, and this was back in 2004, 2005, and so kind of the worst time to be a mortgage broker, and it hurt me inside. But so the ratios, people have to remember that the government has a regulatory role in almost every level of finance. And when you start talking about the FHA's role within housing, the fact that we could start to change debt to income ratios for loans over a certain size. We could start to look at different ways to create different financial incentives in the market. I think we could have a robust housing scenario that would keep people from profiting off of our. So housing is our number one asset, like as an individual, and people have found a lot of ways to capture our productive capacity, either through rent or interest. And there's some pretty creative solves as far as how to reduce that, but it's not necessarily building public structures. There is a zoning conversations, absolutely. So in the state of Montana, you could promote an environment that would open up large sections of land to small zoning. So there's a lot of restrictions, like for example, around just where I live, you have 5-acre pieces of property where the local government is won't let you break it up, and so if you think about it, like just moving a 5-acre piece of place to a 1/4 of an acre, all it takes is some incentive programs for local governments to actually be building in a certain direction. And we forget, like I used to follow some futurists, and we can look out and start to create the cities of the future. We can start to create like the ways we want to live in the future. Like the world's not ending, it's still going on. We can start putting something out there that's a little bit more creative than what we've seen in the past. But as far as Casa living in urban areas, that is something I'm not an expert on. It's something that, like in Montana, I think I can make a pretty good handle on limiting the price escalation of housing. But certainly, I don't know how to get over the problems you're seeing in New York and San Francisco.
What's the highest population city in Montana? Is it Billings?
I think Billings currently has the record. Missoula is a pretty large one, and Bozeman's growing. And those counties are all in about 100,000.
Yeah, they're all still pretty small relatively.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we have 1 million people in the state and 1 congressman. So.
Yep, and 2 senators.
Yep, and 2 senators. So you want to talk about some disproportional weight in your voice. That's the voice of Montana. So
um, oops, I didn't mean to click on that one. Someone asked if a Bernie president happens, what's your stance on resolving student debt crisis? But I want to frame it a little differently. Did you go to college?
I did. I went to college, and I still have student loans. Yep.
And you still have student loans. So, as someone who this affects personally, what do you think the solution should be to the student debt crisis?
Yeah, I would just echo that we have an education cost crisis. Student loans right now, I think it's inappropriate for the government to just foot the bill. So, I would say I'm pretty aligned with where Andrew was on this, but I do think that the government has already said that it's willing to do some debt forgiveness for things like teachers. I think we could probably incentivize people to become doctors because there's a real doctor shortage. But I would like to throw money more specifically at the needs of the needs of the American economy. But I do think that student loan interest is something that we can look at, and I do think that potentially allowing some level of bankruptcy. Letting it be included in bankruptcy would be a good idea, because like my student loans are 7.5%, and I'm not allowed to declare bankruptcy on them. So I don't know why my lender would be getting such a risk premium. That just seems silly to me. So I think maybe adding it to the scope of the CFPB for now. Let's do universal basic income first. I think healthcare is a higher priority, and then I think within education, I think we need to build that up before we pay for student debts. So, yeah, hopefully that helps. I'm sorry.
No, I agree. Someone said something funny. They were like, "We have a Yang Republican here," and then someone else is like a Yang Publican.
Nice.
It's just funny. I love the Yang Gang so much. I love how there's.
Yeah, we could trend Yang Publican. That would be good.
We're a very diverse and unique block of people who I think have all rallied around this idea that the partisan politics in Washington is not working, and we need to do something about it. So I really respect what you're doing. Guys, everyone who's watching, make sure you follow Dan on Twitter. It's at Dan for Montana. I'm gonna pull that link up here in the chat. And guys, just help support candidates like Dan who are trying to elevate these ideas in this platform. If we're all stuck inside, if you have time to reach out to Dan's team and pick up the phone and call Democrats and Republicans and tell them that there's this unique candidate running and that's offering, to steal a word from Andrew Yang, like a new path forward.
Yep.
And stop. What does it stand for again? I forgot.
See the other perspective.
See the other perspective. Yes. The other perspective. So, I think that's it. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Okay.
If you have any like closing message or final topic you want to discuss, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, so just one thing. So there's a UBI caucus out there. It's I think 22, 23 candidates. If everybody contributes like the everybody in the Yang Gang contributes like the cost of a cup of coffee, $2-3 to these candidates. I think you'd start to see them make some real moves, and the ROI on you getting $12,000 a year, it's pretty high. So,
it's the only thing that holds back the people versus the establishment. It's money.
Yeah, so, and right now the only people spending money is the people that fund establishment candidates. So if we want to balance the conversation, I hate saying that okay, give me money. I mean, I gave hundreds of dollars to Andrew Yang, and I kind of felt like, hey, I didn't really have that money in the first place. I just believed in something. Yeah. but if we do it smart and if we do it over time, then there's going to be a base for everybody that grabs a microphone to promote universal basic income. And even if I lose, the conversation goes forward, and we have that many more UBI supporters in the state of Montana.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, final last one I just thought of: democracy dollars. Yeah,
I think public funding of elections might be necessary until we're able to kick the voices out of politics. But if everybody, before we get there, before you have to legislate it into a reality, I think everybody should consider budgeting like $100 per election cycle. But yeah, democracy dollars. The one thing that I don't think we talk about enough is the American scorecard is the cheapest thing we can do to change things for generations. So I would say that UBI, American scorecard, and then if we're unable to change the conversation, it has to be democracy dollars would be probably my third Yang platform.
And the one last one before we end this: term limits. Do you think they should be in place?
I think Yang was kind of creative, offering a proposal to grandfathering in people with term limits. I like to think that we could all take individual accountability. I mean, I'm kind of an idealist that says I think that we should be able to, just go with 10.5 million Yang style UBI voters, and we all agree that we want regular, fresh voices into the conversation, and then we start developing a pipeline. I think you would do so much great work in the beginning that you would establish a way forward where the next generations don't even have to worry about term limits. But I never want to see another Mitch McConnell. I'm tired of the establishment, and you shouldn't be a 30-year politician.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think everybody's tired of the establishment. That's why Trump won. That's why Bernie almost won. Yeah. All right. That's going to wrap up this interview. So make sure you guys check him out. Once again, it's Daniel Larson, danformontana.com, on Twitter at danformontana. I know you're on Facebook as well.
Yep.
The link is at the bottom of your website. We have a real chance, guys, to elevate a new generation of solutions-oriented, nonpartisan politicians, and it's awesome to see someone running on these ideas on the Republican side of the aisle. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yep. All right, see everybody later.
Bye.